friends, and welcome back to Ghouls Night In, the spooky chat show with your best ghoul friends. I'm Penny Snark.
And I'm Midge Munster.
Normally, at the start of these episodes, we talk a little bit about why the topic came up, but today I'm just going to jump into it, and that reason will be revealed later, if you're okay with that.
Okay,
Midge.
let me put on my blindfold real quick. Just
All right.
tying that back. Okay, I'm ready to dive in.
All right. So let's talk about a foundational piece of Gothic literature that has had such a big cultural impact that it's just become part of the common lexicon. We are talking about Robert Louis Stevenson's Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
Ooh.
Hmm.
I don't want to jump ahead, but I feel like I understand now. I'm laughing to myself. Yes, I'm having a hearty chuckle by my onesie over here for that purpose. But yes, all will be revealed, I'm sure.
All will be revealed. All right, so this novella came out in 1886, which puts it firmly in the area of those crazy Victorians.
Woo!
I thought I'll put that in there now because I feel like that makes a lot of what we're going to talk about make sense.
Sure.
Because this story actually started its life as one of the most iconic Victorian traditions, a spooky Christmas story.
Ah, hell yeah.
Ah, hell yeah. So Robert Louis Stevenson, also the author of Treasure Island, and that had already come out and was a big hit. He'd already published a lot of short stories and essays, and so he was actually invited to write a ghost story for the Christmas issue of Longman's magazine, where the publisher kind of featured like all of his favorite authors in like this special spooky Christmas edition.
Man, that would be a real... at least for people like us, I'm like, that'd be a real badge of honor and be, like, invited to write a ghost story for a prestigious thing. That's
incredible. Yes, so I feel like I probably read this story for the first time in middle school.
I feel like that's kind of the curriculum age that it hits, yeah.
Yes. So for anyone who hasn't read this story, or if you haven't read it since middle school,
period.
There are some details that you may not remember. So we're going to go for a little synopsis right now.
Good.
So in grand Victorian fashion, the main character of this novella is not Dr. Henry Jekyll, but some other guy named Gabriel Utterson, who is Dr. Jekyll's lawyer.
Classic case of, let me tell you a story about some guy I knew.
Right, I gotta tell you about some guy. I would say I'm also, like, feeling very much like the Jonathan Harker energy. Like, you have to have, like, a dude with a respectable, boring job.
Right.
In which he may meet interesting and bizarre people.
Right.
It's like, I'm just a guy with a little job, just trying to live my life.
Same, honestly.
So, in this story, Utterson is out for a walk with his cousin, and he's like... And the cousin is like, oh my god, I was in this neighborhood and I saw this guy named Edward Hyde beat up a little girl. And when I made him give her family some money for it, the check was signed by Henry Jekyll. Isn't that your client? And Utterson's like, oh shit, Jekyll just updated his will to make some guy named Edward Hyde his sole beneficiary. Like, what if he is getting blackmailed by some bad news dude? Like... I gotta look into this.
Gotta check that out.
Gotta check it out. And so through the story, like, Dr. Jekyll keeps trying to blow him off, but weird shit keeps happening. Eventually, Mr. Hyde kills a guy, and people are trying to find him. Everything's crazy and weird, and, like, strange, circumstances. And finally, in the end, Utterson comes to Jekyll's lab, where he finds Hyde lying dead on the ground in Jekyll's clothes. But luckily, also in the Grand Victorian of Victorian literature, Dr. Jekyll left a bunch of letters talking about what he did and why.
Yes, I gotta leave the explanations.
Yes, I gotta leave my explanations. So he wrote these letters where he's like, I have always been this moral and upstanding guy, and I have all this shame about my illicit desires, so I've invented this serum that I could take to transform into a different person so I can indulge in my vices in secret, and then I have to take the serum again to turn back. But then it turns out that this secret extra self to do bad things was in fact a bad person and was terrible. And then he started transforming unconsciously without the serum, and it was taking like even more serum than before to turn him back from Hyde into Jekyll.
And it turns out the bad guy who wants to do bad stuff doesn't want to turn back into
Right.
the good guy.
Yes.
He wants to keep doing bad stuff.
He does. Although he does give up in the end, because in the letter, Jekyll is like, well, I've run out of serum. I tried to make a new batch and it's not really working. So the next time I transform into Hyde, I will be gone forever and functionally die. So Hyde, you're going to have to decide whether you want to be arrested for your crimes or if you're just going to kill yourself. Either way, not my problem. Peace out. And like
XOXO
Jekyll. And as we discover, Hyde did decide to just take the coward's way out, as I'm sure the Victorians would say.
Yes.
So that is the strange and unusual story, which is very awkward. The thing that has been the wildest to me is finding out that there's no "the" in the title of this story.
Like,
it's not called The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll. It's just Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
I honestly don't even remember that part.
Yeah.
I just remember it being called Jekyll and Hyde.
Yes.
Or Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's the synopsis, but there is actually also some fun lore about the writing of this story. Oh. We'll say some of it is probably embellishment, but it is a fun story.
In the Victorian era? I can't imagine.
Era, so as we said, Stevenson had been asked to write this Christmas ghost story. So he was thinking about it, trying to decide what he wanted to write, and he actually was having a nightmare, and his wife Fanny woke him up from it, and when she woke up, he said, quote, "Why did you wake me? I was dreaming a fine bogey tale."
Okay.
You know.
Weirdo.
A fine bogey tale. So he had been dreaming about Jekyll's transformation into Hyde, and when he woke up, he was immediately like, this is it. I gotta write this down. So he starts slamming out this story. He gives it to Fanny to read. And Fanny was also a short story writer, so good for her. And she was like, Robert, babe, you're writing this like a story, but it's actually an allegory. And he was like, oh my God, you're so right. And he threw the draft into the fire.
Bum, bum, bum.
Dun, 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 and was like, I'm going to start over. That part is maybe not like strictly true, although I wouldn't say like there are writers who like will write a first draft and then get rid of it entirely and then like kind of start from scratch.
I would say any man that starts awake and yells, "I was having a brilliant bogey tale," probably has a flair for the dramatic.
This is also true.
I don't doubt that maybe he threw that shit in the fire.
Yes. So he did go on to take about 6 weeks to revise, edit, and create the version of the story that we know it today. So he may have dreamed some of these specific scenes, but the roots of the story actually go deeper than that to some true crime.
Yeah.
Some Victorian crime. So Stevenson was fascinated by the case of William Brodie, who was a well-respected cabinet maker in Edinburgh, and he had like a role in the local trade guild, a place on the city council, and was like, you know, just a respectable man about town. But in secret, he was a thief, and he would use his access to wealthy people's homes. And apparently being a cabinet maker also involved like installing locks at this period in time and doing, I mean, I guess you have locks on cabinets, but he would like secretly make copies of people's house keys and come back later and steal stuff. Spent all of his money on gambling and mistresses, but eventually he was caught and hanged. And Stevenson had actually written a play about Brodie, and it didn't do that well, but obviously he was still thinking about that kind of dichotomy of, like, the respectable man and becoming the lawless criminal in the night.
It's interesting, though, like, he's... Again, I know that's, like, not the point, but I'm like, he got contracted to write a ghost story. This isn't a ghost story.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like Victorians are
I mean,
shaky,
it's spooky.
And they're just kind of like a spooky story.
Yeah, that's fair.
I'm trying to think. I feel like some of the stories we looked at in your like Victorian ghost book did not actually have a ghost in them.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like there was at least like a haunting element, though.
This is true. Yeah, kind of like a specter of doom or something.
Yeah, like something. This one's just like, man, this guy's bad.
Well, they didn't know about like sci-fi yet, so they
maybe
had
it's
to be
the ghost of the like unknown self, the ghosts that live within us.
Okay, so the other thing that pointed out to me when I was reading this was a Christmas ghost story, but this magazine didn't come out until January. So what are you even doing, Victorians?
Well, are they in the 12 days of Christmas? Did it come out before January 6th?
Maybe. I do not know. It was so it came out in January 86, and it was immediately a huge hit. Like, people were crazy about this shit. So the first stage adaptation actually premiered in May of 87. So like just over a year. They were not wasting any time. They were like, this is a hit. Yeah. Something that I find really interesting is that some of the adjustments from the original story that we still like commonly see in adaptations started then. It was in this very first play that they added a love interest who is not in the original story at all. Like, there is no kind of romantic lady in there.
Well, if you're going to entertain the masses, you got to put a love story in there, right?
You got to put a love story in there. Speaking of that, so I definitely, like, when this was taught to me in the middle school, I remember it being taught very much as being about, like, you know, morality, the duality of man. Not a lot of people who were like, this story is kind of gay. Is this story kind of a closeted vibe? The fact that Dr. Jekyll has like these desires that are too scandalous to even name,
like hiding his
and
true
that
self.
There is no female love interest, or even I don't think there's actually a named female character in the story at all. Which, I mean, hashtag Victorian times, but that's still
Sure.
pretty wild.
Yeah.
And one of the reviews that an article I read on The Beast Within by James Campbell about it kind of points out that it's like this idea, this fear that like this strange young man is blackmailing this older doctor has a little bit of a gay vibe. And as soon as I was like, you know what, there is a gay vibe here. And then I found out that he borrowed the name Jekyll from a guy named Walter Jekyll that he became friends with, who Wikipedia damningly describes as almost certainly homosexual. like the fact that that's on Wikipedia, where like there's like a lot of dancing around about stuff, and just in this article they were just like almost certainly homosexual.
Put that on my epitaph. Remember many episodes ago where you asked me what my epitaph would be, and I couldn't think of it. We got her. We got her. Ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, and it turns out that Stevenson actually had a few gay friends, like people who were some of the original people who were talking openly about gay stuff. And so good for him. One of whom, John Addington Symonds, who was a poet, and actually potentially was maybe the first person to use the word homosexual in English.
Oh, wow.
Like, he's not credited with it because the first publication of it in like 1892, and his book was published in 1893, but he actually like wrote it 10 years beforehand.
Oh, wow.
So it was like, so he wrote like a whole thing about, like the Greeks, that kind of thing that the Victorian gay crowd was into.
Yes.
So it would make sense that this was something that like Stevenson was thinking about and was kind of aware of. And there was a quote from Symonds talking about it, who was like saying that like it hits really close to home when you read this story. So it definitely felt like contemporaries of the time were like, hiding secrets seems kind of gay.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, sadly, yeah. I mean, that's why, we talk about all these monster stories being so relatable for queer people. Like, when that final decision of like, are you going to live as your true self, or are you going to end it all, is unfortunately a very relatable thing for a lot of queer people. Yes. So I can definitely see how that would translate especially for men in that time too.
Definitely. Yeah, so it definitely plays on kind of like the general Victorian sensibility of public versus private life, like this kind of desire to present the best of yourself to the world, which, I mean, we obviously still have that today, but
Oh, yeah.
especially, it was especially distinct, I would say, in the Victorian time. And so there were also like some scholarly opinions I saw that it was about being a Scottish person living in England. But
The two classic allegories, homosexuality and being Scottish.
Yeah. And so in that same Beast Within essay that I read, he was like, I mean, Stevenson did write about being Scottish, like, actually, so, like, if he meant that, he probably would have made it a little bit clearer. But at the time, Stevenson even said that, like, he didn't want to commit to any specific, like, interpretation of it. He did say, like, oh, everyone's, like, simplifying too much to make it just be, like, about sex. But he did want it to be open to interpretation, kind of like what exactly that allegory is saying.
Well, and it is, I mean, definitely universal. Everybody has things about themselves they're not proud of, right?
Yes, definitely.
And that they choose to hide from people, so...
Yeah, some other things that I think are kind of interesting of how the story has changed over the years. I feel like in a lot of modern adaptations, Hyde is presented as, like, outwardly monstrous.
Yeah, like, he gives, like, physical change.
Exactly. But, like, in this original story, like, he was just another regular dude. Like, he looked different enough from Jekyll that people didn't know they were the same person, but he was just a guy. And it is, for that same reason, like, obviously it makes sense in adaptations to have Jekyll and Hyde be played by the same actor, but it does kind of remove, like, the story is a mystery, like, in its original form. You don't really know what's going on. Who the heck is this other guy? Yeah, you're like, who's this?
Yeah, I think I weirdly almost would like that better.
Yeah.
Really. It's more fun that way.
Totally. So there are so many adaptations of this story that there is a whole separate Wikipedia page on it.
I believe that, yeah.
And it was, in fact, a specific adaptation of Jekyll and Hyde that inspired me to do this episode. But yeah, so it's ongoing. There was a movie just last year called Dr. Jekyll, which starred the lovely Susie Eddy Izzard. There are, the adaptations of the original story, but also a lot of retellings. I think it's interesting that a lot of these retellings kind of play with, like, gender themes. Sometimes you have, like, one of the sides of the transformation is a woman and one is a man, which definitely adds some extra flavor, as well as, like, horror themes. Sometimes they just throw in Jack the Ripper or Sherlock Holmes, just being like, hey, it's the Victorian time. Let's put this guy here. I feel like I see
a lot of people draw the, like, line to Jack the Ripper with this. And I feel like that's the most common thing I think of adaptation-wise, but I don't like that.
Yeah.
Personally.
No, yeah. Some other highlights. I remember watching a 2007 BBC series by Stephen Moffat, who famously wrote for Doctor Who and Sherlock. It's called Just Jekyll. I definitely watched that in college. There's a Gilligan's Island episode that parodies Jekyll and Hyde.
Oh my gosh, yes! You just opened, like, a secret window in my brain. I forgot about that.
There are also several porn versions.
Oh, great.
My favorite of which was called Dr. Jerkoff and Mr. Hard.
I hate it here. I don't want to live on this planet anymore.
Do you have a favorite adaptation, Midge, or one that, like, you kind of, like, think of first when you're thinking of this story?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is that our, like, I can't remember if it's our opera or our ballet does it, like, kind of in rotation every other year. Like, I think it must be the ballet, because it's, like, sometimes at Halloween they do Dracula, and then sometimes there's a Jekyll and Hyde. And I've always wanted to see it, and it never works out that I get to go just because of how our schedules are in October. But I've always been intrigued by how that would play without, like, seeing it as a traditional film setting. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, being more of that high art, like, woohoo, fashion. I would like to see that.
For sure. Yeah, and I'm sorry if anyone's hearing the rain out there. We've got some extra ASMR on this spooky rainy night.
It's adding to the spooky sound effect.
Yes, adding to
scape.
the atmosphere of this Gothic literature evening. So it's time to talk about my favorite adaptation of Jekyll and Hyde.
Okay.
And do you remember? This is going to date this episode and also our lives, but do you remember for a while there was that trending like clip on TikTok that was like the "What's your favorite Pop-Tart" from those Basement Yard podcast guys?
Yes. Yeah, sorry, I had to retrieve that from my memory hard drive, but yes.
So for anyone who doesn't know, basically the format of this clip is a guy being like, "Oh, what's your favorite Pop-Tart?" And the other guy's like, "Oh, it's strawberry." And he's like, "Oh, that's such a basic answer." And then he's like, "Okay, you want to know what it really is?" Yeah. The 2002 tie-in merch Pop-Tarts that came out for the Spider-Man movie. And that is me in this moment, because my favorite Jekyll and Hyde adaptation is Jekyll and Hyde the musical, but not in general, specifically the 1994 recording, Jekyll and Hyde, the Gothic musical thriller, the complete work.
Okay.
So, for anyone who doesn't know, there is a Jekyll and Hyde musical.
Yes, now that you said this, not my high school, but my sister high school did this when we were sophomores, and my best friend was in it. So I have seen this show live. It is a lot of fun.
Ooh, is this the same show with like
with
hookers
Lucy
and
the
stuff?
prostitute? Yes.
Yep. Okay, I was
with
like,
with
you said
the
high
song,
school, and I was like, wait a minute.
With the song "Bring on the Men." Absolutely. Yes.
Incredible. All right. Yes. So this Jekyll and Hyde musical came into being in conception, surprise, in the late 1980s. It initially premiered in 1990 in Houston, Texas, and it was a big hit. They took like a hiatus. They recorded this complete works album. They brought it back to the stage in 1995, and it was so popular that they actually started a national tour. And the show then underwent major rewrites. Oh my God, it's like hailing.
Whoa,
Jesus
it's
Christ.
Wow.
The world does not want this podcast to happen. All right. So it goes to Broadway. It went to Broadway in 1997. It was not well reviewed. It did run through 2001 and is perhaps best known for a filmed production with David Hasselhoff in the starring role of Jekyll / Hyde. Yes.
Oh, I did not know about that.
In his Broadway debut. So I'm not going to get too deep into this. The musical kind of steps away definitely from like the original plot line and kind of features a Jekyll who is trying to like solve the like problems of like criminals and mental illness by like separating evil out of people is kind of the focus here. If folks are familiar with this musical, it is probably because of the song "This Is the Moment" is often picked out of this production for like Broadway mixes, which is just hilarious to me because it's like this inspiring song about like turning aside your doubts and pursuing your dreams and being like, it's time to make it happen. But I'm like, this is a song about having been rejected in your request to have a human test subject for your bizarre experiment, and you're like, you know what? I'm just going to inject it into myself and murder a bunch of people. So not that inspiring, in my opinion.
I mean, I guess it depends on what inspires you.
It's true. I would say the other most well thing nowadays is that a clip from Jekyll and Hyde was also a viral TikTok sound.
Oh, yes.
The "I'll live inside you forever" with Satan himself by my side. No! No! That is Hyde and Jekyll. So, addition to these things, this musical includes some of my favorite tropes, such as a dramatic Latin choral performance. As I love that you brought this up, Midge, because I literally have in my notes a winkingly raunchy song full of sex puns from a hooker with a heart of gold.
It's very, like, left field Moulin Rouge
yes,
in the middle
like,
of
hey,
this.
would you like a Moulin Rouge scene?
Yeah.
And of course there's an overwrought tragic ending. The musical is extremely campy, but I don't think that it knows that it's campy, which
I would
is
agree.
delightful. Everyone is like deadly serious about this.
So, every production I've ever seen, they've played it so intense.
Yes.
And it's so stupid.
It's so stupid. So, yes. So, I'm gonna say, so all of the different recordings have different songs and, like, different lyrics because they rewrote and changed it so many times. So, I do say that my 1994 recording is just absolutely choice for a dramatic solo performance. It has, like, real great musical theater folks on there. And I was honestly like, should I do an episode about Jekyll and Hyde, the musical? Because I was, of course, listening to this and belting it out as I was driving home from Minneapolis. But then I was like, I really only care about this one recording. So that would just maybe be
too niche?
be too niche, too short. And I did watch the David Hasselhoff production specifically for this episode, just in the sense of fairness and wanting to be a good podcaster. And I am going to stick by my statement that I would only recommend this CD recording.
So now we return to the top of the episode where
Yes.
Penny said, and I quote, I'm going to just dive in blind, because you posted.
I did post.
On Instagram, it said something about, to the effect of, when you've, like, consumed something for podcasting and realized you were right to have not consumed it.
Yes.
And I messaged her and I was like, wait, what? Tell me.
Yes, so many people were like, what happened? Also, I had to post a follow-up because people were like, oh, was it lutefisk? And I was like, I love that you think I'm eating lutefisk for this podcast.
Well, you know what is even funnier is that, so at the time that you had posted that, originally we were supposed to be recording that evening.
Yep.
So I thought you had not consumed, like, a food to keep your voice, like your throat clear for podcasting. And then you ate it, and then you got sick.
Oh my gosh, I love that. Yep, I love the dichotomy between people who were immediately like, what did you watch? And people who were like, what did you eat?
Hotties with IBS immediately were like, oh my god, are you okay? What did you eat?
Right, oh my gosh. But yeah, also, the greatest crime of that adaptation, apart from being cringe in literally every way, is that it doesn't include Bring On the Men.
The best song.
Yeah,
arguably.
It's replaced with some song called, like, Good and Evil. So there's still, like, a random, like, burlesque number, but it's significantly less good, in my opinion.
Yeah, you gotta have Bring On the Men.
Yes, I will say, if anyone does want to seek out, one other thing I would recommend is one of those, like, Broadway Backwards fundraisers did gender swapped Bring On the Men.
Ooh,
and it's extremely good. So
that's fun.
Look that up on YouTube. But yes, that is my tale, my twisted tale of Jekyll and Hyde.
Oh my gosh. Wow, I didn't think I was going to revisit Jekyll and Hyde the musical today, but I'm so glad that you brought that back into my brain.
I just had to do it for you.
One of my good friends, who later went on to become a very successful Broadway performer, was the Lucy in that show. And she was so good, even though we were like 15 and she was playing a hooker, she slayed Bring On the Men, and I think of her often.
I love that. Oh my gosh. Well, everyone out there, I want to know what your favorite Jekyll and Hyde adaptation is. If you also have a love-hate / cringe relationship with Jekyll and Hyde the musical, I just let us know.
If you have a love / hate / cringe relationship with David Hasselhoff, let us know.
Please do. So if you have enjoyed this show, we would love if you would give us a review to let us know what you think. And I do believe Midge has one that she's going to share today.
I do, and I read this as you were hitting record, and so if you listen back to the beginning of the episode when I say, and I'm Midge Munster, you can hear me giggling, because I didn't read this until we had already started.
I love that.
It caught me off guard. So this is a 5-star review from Emily Me, titled ADHD Spooky Queens.
Good start.
Midge talking about how undiagnosed ADHD people love the live-action Grinch movie is is 100% true. This could be on the diagnosis questionnaire.
Oh my god, I understand why you were giggling. That's just really good.
I just love this podcast, and I feel so seen as I listen along. Thank you, Emily. That just, like, made my whole day. I forgot that we talked about that at the Grinch episode.
That is so good.
Oh, man. That got me good. Yeah. Got me, gal.
All right. So if you guys want to follow along with us, you can find us over on Instagram at Ghouls and Night In Pod. And you can find me at Penny Snark on all the things.
And you can find me across the web at Midge Munster.
And until next time, good